Hi, friends. Angelica Vanetta, co chair of Inclusive ICR. We are a coalition of over 220 employers in eastern Iowa, all working together to grow the diversity and inclusion of our workforce, to create a space where employees feel a sense of belonging, included, and valued. Inclusive ICR is a proud sponsor of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion track of the Iowa Ideas Conference. As you participate today, be sure to connect with other Inclusive ICR champions, as we'd love to share information with you about our upcoming coalition meetings, projects, and how our work is impacting positive social change in our region. Be sure to visit our website at inclusiveiowa.org for information on upcoming events and to sign up for our e-newsletter. Thank you and have a great conference.
All right, welcome everyone. You are in the literacy and reading session in the diversity, equity, and inclusion track. We are so happy to have you here. We have a wonderful panel for you on this topic today. We want to thank our conference presenting sponsor, ITC Midwest, and also the diversity, equity, and inclusion track sponsor, Inclusive ICR. Please remember that you are being recorded. Closed captioning access is available. You can go ahead and please do this. Please put your questions in the Q&A function in the Whova app where you registered for the conference. We really want to make sure that we honor your questions and we have this really a participatory dialogue today. So we are going to go ahead and get started with our wonderful panel, and we're going to start with Wanda.
Hi, I'm Wanda Steary. I'm with the Iowa Department of Education. I'm the Dyslexia and Science of Reading consultant at the department. And my why behind literacy is that I supported my child and other children throughout the years with their literacy efforts, and I'm really passionate that we help all kids learn how to read if they can.
That's fantastic. And if you want to just say how you're connected to the issue as well, in addition to your why, that's fantastic.
Okay. I'm connected to the issue because of the science of reading, and the reason I work at the department and I'm the science of reading and dyslexia consultant is because I really believe that there is a way to learn how to read and that we need to help people understand that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We'll go on to Sean.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sean Datchik. I am the director of the Iowa Reading Research Center here at the University of Iowa. Professionally, I'm very invested in having my career contribute to not only teacher preparation, but also helping caregivers understand the important aspects of literacy. Prior to my role here, I'm a former K-12 special education teacher. Also have dual endorsements in elementary education. I was a special education director and academic director. Personally speaking, my connection to reading is my mother immigrated to the United States in 1970 from China, and there was no such thing as English language learning services, not to the degree that there is today. So she struggled mightily to develop English reading as a high school student. And so that definitely stuck with me. And then also as a child, I received special education services as well. So I think that there is, to Wanda's point, there is something to be said for contributing to the larger state of Iowa, but then also nationally, internationally, the very important skill of helping students, regardless of age, learn how to read and read well.
Thank you so much, Sean. Travis.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Travis Wilkins. I'm the assistant superintendent at ADM Schools, a district just located west of the Des Moines Metro in central Iowa. We have about 2,300 students. Professionally, I started out as an elementary teacher, teaching reading. And one of my biggest whys is the importance of leadership and actually making this happen at the district level across the state. 4 years ago, we confronted some brutal facts in our own school system. We identified we had 25% of our students that were not proficient in reading in grades pre-K through 11, something that I think would have come to a surprise to many in our community. And I'll share more probably later as we get into this, but over 4 years, we've reduced that from 25% down to 12%, seen incredible growth across the district. And the commitment we've made to our community is you bring your students to ADM, we will work with them to teach them how to read based on how the brain learns to read. And we know not every student's going to get it at the same time. And there's a number of years it takes to get some students across the finish line. But I'm really excited because we've taken this on as K-12, not only early literacy, because we have many students in our system that have past gaps that weren't addressed through some of the gaps that you'll hear more about today. And this last year, our high school, only 6% of students were not proficient in reading. And that's what this is all about, is helping every student on their journey of what it takes for them to cross that finish line. And there's so much we know now about how the brain learns to read. And that's what my why is. And that's why I'm passionate about this topic.
Thank you, Bambi.
And my name is Bambi Boggs, and I am the dyslexia specialist for the Ottumwa School District. And I have a whole lot of why. I'm sitting here personally as a person with dyslexia who struggled through school, getting no help, was never in title or special ed back in the 70s and 80s. I taught myself how to read. And I'm here as a passionate advocate for parents who are sitting at an IEP meeting who have no idea what's going on. I am all about educating parents so that they understand that the power is also in their hands and they have a right to be able to sit at this table and have a good conversation about what their child needs to learn to read.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Appreciate that passion. So before we get into more of the passionate talk, which I know you all have a lot to share on that, would love Wanda to just give us a level set about what is the science of reading.
Yes, thank you for that. You know, so many times I have other people say to me, the science of reading is this program or that program, and it really isn't. It is not a program. The science of reading is a large body of research. And the interesting thing about this research is that it comes from multiple fields. And so it's come from education, linguistics, psychology, neuroscience, and from these multiple studies from these multiple fields have converged, meaning that they have come together to say, this is how a child learns to read. Like the evidence is there, and it's not just one group stating this is true, it's multiple groups stating that this is true. So this body of research is so important for educators to understand and tap into so that we really understand like what our students need to learn and the best techniques to use to teach them how to read. And so we use the research, the science of reading, the research within the science of reading to, inform our teacher prep programs, our instructional materials, professional learning in districts. We can use this research in so many ways, but the important thing to know is that if you think it's a program, it's not. It's not a program. It is a body of research. So.
It's very important for people to understand there's a huge difference. And I would love for Sean to weigh in on the legislation that led to this science being rolled out at all our schools.
All right, yeah, so I can speak a little bit to some, I think, three, at least from a research perspective, very interesting developments in state legislation. So the first would be House File 2545. And sort of the key parts to hear, I guess the main course for this is that one is that it talks about creating a statewide literacy plan. And in that statewide literacy plan, it specifically highlights these parts that Wanda alluded to for what we consider evidence-based practice. So what are some key details that we can pull from different research studies on what are effective and efficient ways to help students learn how to read? One would be the use of systematic and explicit instruction. So another way of saying that is that we just try to present how to read in an unambiguous manner. So we try to give students direct, simple strategies to use. And then there's these 5 sort of what's called the pillars of reading, where it explicitly talks about that across the state, we need a renewed focus on such things as phonemic awareness, which would be sort of the individual sounds that compose a letter or compose a word. I apologize. So let's say if the word is cat, so cat. So phonemic awareness would be picking out those little sounds and manipulating them. Phonics is attaching those sounds to different letters, representations. Vocabulary, I know everybody sort of has a lesson. If you were a teacher, I'm sure everybody has a lesson plan that they remember that went horribly. one of the ones that I remember that went very poorly was due to my lack of teaching students some important vocabulary. So where they didn't know what the word satellite meant. So if you don't know what the word satellite means, it's incredibly confusing to think about something that's floating around in space. And then reading with fluency, so that connected text. And then finally, understanding what's writer comprehension. So it calls for that. So that House File 2545 calls for that statewide literacy plan. And then importantly, in that House file, it also puts explicit language that the different content standards that underpin how different preparation programs. So like, for instance, at University of Iowa, University of Northern Iowa, Iowa State, whole bunch, all the preparation programs, they will need to focus on these areas as well. So that's one, House File 2545. The second House file would be House File 2618. And that does a couple of different things. One is that it also now attaches this thing called the Foundations of Reading Assessment. So it calls for pre-service teachers, so college students who are interested in teaching, to have to take this exam that will measure, sort of in broad strokes, what's their specialized knowledge related to reading, so like phonics or phonemic awareness, but then also what's their knowledge on, let's say, explicit instruction. So that's one thing it does. Second thing it does is that now looking at the K-6 grade levels, so students in elementary grades, it also calls for personalized reading plans. So what that means is that if a student displays persistent reading difficulty to where multiple times during the school year, they score below proficient on accepted measures of reading, they would qualify for an individualized plan of support. So that's personalized reading plan that starts at the end of this coming academic year. So that's a personalized reading plan. And then the last thing that it does is that it also explicitly states that parents have discretion or authority to retain their student in the previous grade level if they are concerned about the student's reading difficulties. So House File 2545, that's a statewide plan. House File 2618, that's sort of the personalized reading plan, parental discretion, foundations of reading. And then the last thing, and this wouldn't be legislation, but then the state has also rolled out new academic standards related to what are the benchmarks per grade level for reading. So in sort of broad strokes, those three things are really coming online, so to speak, to where I think they sort of speak to certainly the areas of science of reading that Wanda brought up earlier.
Thank you so much. So Wanda and Sean, you did a great job of laying a very solid foundation for the rest of this discussion. Really appreciate it. So I'm going to turn to Wanda, Sean, and Travis now, and I want you to talk a little bit about the literacy scores compared to other states. And then also talk about the differences between racial and socioeconomic demographics.
Yeah, so Travis talked about his district, but actually in the state of Iowa, we've been stagnant in our scores. So we do have only about 66% of third graders proficient in learning how to read across the state. And this is really significant because we've been there a while. We did dip during the pandemic, but we're back to pre-pandemic levels, which is a good thing for our state. But 66% of our students isn't good enough. We know we can do better. And then if we look more at our data, we actually see gaps. We actually see gaps with children who are English language learners and children who have special needs. We can see up to a 41% gap there. We have a gap with our minority students. Sometimes we can see up to a 30% gap there in different ones. And then and some bit less of a gap, but still a gap persists with our students who are in poverty. So that's why we know as a state we can do better, and why we've had these administrative priorities is because it's really important that we help all of our kids learn to read. And Travis, maybe you were speaking about the district level, so maybe you want to speak about that some more.
Sure, I can kind of just share a little bit about our district, and we are. When we started 4 years ago, we weren't that discrepant from the state of Iowa. And that's one of the things that I would add to this discussion about how we compare to other states and what the path forward is when we look at our subgroups, because we definitely are seeing gaps across the state with our subgroup performance. And we have the same thing in our district, or we had it, and it's been reduced significantly. But I think one of the important messages and one of the things that we did was we stopped comparing ourselves to other states, to other schools, to other districts around us. we have a mission hanging on our wall in virtually every building and many rooms, and it says we're committed to every single student will learn at a high level. That's our mission. It's all students. And so we had to make a decision to actually confront that and commit to, do we actually believe that? Do we believe we can create a system where all students can learn at a high level? It doesn't matter if our students are scoring better than the school down the street, schools in our conference, other schools in Iowa. And the reason I bring that up is I believe over the years that's actually led to a lot of complacency in our state, where districts can compare themselves to maybe other schools in the AEA, other schools nearby, and they can find examples of how they're outperforming other schools. And so they can share that with the community. But the reality is, how are you measuring up compared against your mission, which is all students? And for us, we found that we were only at 75% proficient. One of the things that comes with that is, well, how do we target this? We have maybe IEP students that are less proficient at more of a higher rate, our minority students, our free and reduced lunch, our poverty students in poverty. And so for us, we decided, and I think it's the same thing, we look at our state numbers, when we're dealing with in the mid 30% of students that are not proficient, the response is we need to figure out what all students need at the tier 1 level that works for all kids. We can try to target subgroups, but we're not down to that level. When we're at 33, 34, 35% of students not proficient, this is a whole system response. And my message is this can work. We can do this work as a state, and we've seen it happen in our district. And when we took the approach of we're doing this K-12, we're obviously it's going to look different in our lower grade levels, but we're going to try to work to reduce and provide science-based, evidence-based practices across the board. What happened was our overall percent of students not proficient decreased dramatically, but so did our subgroups. So we not only reduced our district-wide, we went from 25% down to 12%. Our IEP students, we decreased 25%, the number of percent of students not proficient. Our free reduced lunch, we reduced by over 20%. Our non-white students by over 10%. Our male students by over 15%, who were performing significantly different than our female students. And our female students were reduced by 7%. And so my message is, by providing what is good for all and absolutely necessary for some through evidence-based practices, it raises everyone up. And on the flip side, I want to just get this in quickly. One of the things we heard was, well, not every kid needs this. Not every kid needs this type of instruction. And that may be true for a very small percentage of students. But the other thing that's true is, as a teacher standing in front of those students, you don't know which ones those are. And the other thing I want to share is, our advanced numbers also increased. So while we were giving this systematic, explicit instruction, we saw a decrease in students not proficient, but our high achieving students grew significantly. We've increased over 15% in the past few years on our advanced students. And so it rises, it helps everyone raise up. And so that'd be my message to think about where we're at as a state and what's the path forward.
Fantastic. That's what I tell my kids: compete with yourself. Don't worry about anyone else. I love that. And then also, let's get all of our Iowa kids up to par. Before we turn, we have a bonus panelist, everyone, and she's going to introduce herself in a minute. Noemi Medis has enjoyed this as well. And so before Bambi and Noemi talk about the impact of the data on their actual work with students, I'd love for Sean to weigh in on the numbers. And there's also a question from one of our wonderful audience members about how does the 66% proficiency compare to Iowa numbers historically? So if either you or Wanda could respond to it, that would be great.
Yeah. Wanda, would you want me to chime in now, or would you?
Yeah, go ahead, Sean. You chime in now on your data,
Okay.
and then Wanda, you can chime in on the 66% later.
Yeah, that sounds great. So yeah, unfortunately, what we are seeing is this persistent equity issue that isn't unique to Iowa by any means. And what I mean by that is, when we take a look at broad stroke measures on student literacy from pre-K through 12, what we see is that unfortunately there tends to be a substantial proportion of students from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds tend to score lower than other students. I think there are a variety of reasons for those. There are certainly a number of different factors. I think Travis sort of eloquently spoke to one of them, is that there tends to be this persistent research to practice gap. So when I hear Travis talk about and he used this sort of terminology, that tier 1. So this idea behind, and I love the leadership that Travis is doing over there. When we talk about sort of this conception of how schools use their resources, one of the best things that schools can do is really to take a look at this sort of pyramid of how their resources are allocated throughout. So this tier one is this core instruction. And then so that's the instruction that all students receive within a school building. And it is so critical that that is evidence-based, that it is responsive to student needs, that it's dynamic. And just the statistics that Travis talked about and the reduction of students displaying risk for reading difficulties, that's what we find in the research as well, is that focus on high quality tier one instruction, ways of measuring it, ways of collaborating. And I would love it if that was more widely available. And I think that's some of the hard work that we're doing here at the Reading Research Center, is partnering with schools and figuring out how can we infuse these evidence-based practices in school-wide systems so that we just can't simply rely on this Herculean effort by each individual teacher, is that they need to be a part of a team that's pulling in the same direction. So that'd be one. And I think, unfortunately, there tends to be these other factors. So what we know is, for instance, through, let's say, school resources, by and large, unfortunately, students from minority backgrounds are more likely to attend under what we call under-resourced schools. So these are schools that receive fewer tax dollars. They have higher teacher attrition rates. They also report having a larger percentage of first-year teachers, teachers that are teaching outside of their endorsement or license area, so on these emergency endorsements. And that's just been a trend across the United States, unfortunately. And then the last factor would sort of go into this larger bucket. And I apologize. I think we could unpack each one of these factors so I'm just sort of, I realize, providing some glancing things, but these are all very important. But then what we know is that children from minority backgrounds tend to be exposed to multiple social and environmental factors that can increase their risk for academic difficulties. So, for instance, what we know is that a larger percentage of students from minority backgrounds live in poverty, unfortunately. Those poverty constraints tend to influence everything from their degree to access healthcare, their degree to access eye exams, hearing exams, et cetera, that can really throw in road and stumbling blocks. They're also more likely to experience instances of racism or anxiety around those. So when we talk about all the factors that are underpinning this performance gap, we can certainly take a look at those. But I love what Travis talked about is that from a school-based perspective, from an instructor perspective, teacher perspective, a lot of those things can seem overwhelming, but I think it's up to sort of the adults in the school building to sort of be blunt, to sort of figure out what's something that's under our control that we can sort of press down on and shape a system to where we're all sort of working together by looking at different preventative techniques, evidence-based things that can help drive student achievement on those.
Thank you so much for addressing some of those things, Sean. Appreciate it. And Wanda, if you could just do a really brief about the 66%. Is it up? Is it down? Is it steady?
Yeah, so one thing I want to be clear about is that the Iowa assessment changed in 2018. So we really are comparing back to that point, and we started at about that level. We dipped during the right after the pandemic, and now we're right at that level again. So historically, we have been stagnant as a state, whether we look at NAEP in grade 4 or the Iowa assessment. Our numbers have been steady. We have not seen great drops, but we have also not seen great increase.
I appreciate that. So, given that stagnancy, given some of the differences in demographics, we'll start with Bambi and then we'll go to Noemi. Can you tell us a little bit about these data and how the differences impact your work with our Iowa kiddos?
Well, I'm going to relate back to what Sean and Travis just talked about, that our key is to get teachers to teach to the edges of their classroom, which means every child in that classroom gets the education they deserve. And so we worked really hard on differentiation of core and what that looks like. So we have push-in teachers, we have pull-out teachers, we have a huge framework that we're working on academically. And we have a lot of background, a lot of teachers that have the what and the why, but they didn't have the how. And so bringing in coaches to walk alongside them and some extra job-embedded PDs has really helped systemically be able to understand why they're doing what they're doing and how it is helping. And so some of my data actually is digging really, really deep into the learner profile So when I get a student's name across my email, usually it's about the learner, but we don't realize that it's actually about the instruction. It's about the curriculum. It's about the environment. Then finally, it's about the learner. And so getting teachers to think about it's those other three things that need to come first. Is the environment suitable for this student to learn? Is the instruction at the level that that student needs? Is it multisensory? Is it differentiated? All of those pieces are very powerful to make sure that every student in your classroom is getting what they need.
Thank you, Bambi. And Noemi, our bonus panelist, and thank you for persevering with technical difficulties. If you could just introduce yourself and state your why before answering the question, and I can repeat the question if necessary.
Yeah, I do appreciate that because I'll probably forget. Thanks for having me. Noemi Mendez. I am a coordinator for Des Moines Public Schools. I am endorsed in pretty much everything, reading, ELL, K-12, literacy, masters in literacy, ELL, K-12. I have been an administrator, coordinator, interim principal. There's a lot of things that I do. I'm an author and doctoral student pursuing a career in culturally responsive leadership. So I'll be doing a capstone within the next couple months. So I'm excited about that. And my why is definitely my passion is in regards to all our students. I'm there, feet in the ground every day, trying to figure out how we're going to close gaps. You guys said a lot of great things. Chris, go ahead and repeat the question, but I am so passionate about this. Everything you guys said, I ditto, and I'll add my 2 cents in a second.
Absolutely. I just want you to expand on one thing that you said in your intro. You said you're an author. What ages do you write for?
So right now, I'm all over the place. I just wrote an article for our new Hefas magazine that will be published soon. Our first magazine's out, and the second one's coming up in the next year. But I also write for children's books. So early literacy is my expertise. So I wrote a couple books that I just published, bilingual books, and we're celebrating bilingual literacy right now. Such an important thing for our students, particularly. We have a lot of refugee MLLs, and Spanish-speaking students predominate the largest group. So we need to ensure that that is a gift, an asset, not a deficit. And a lot of the times our kids that come from Spanish-speaking or any other language stop speaking their first language because they feel like it's an embarrassment and they don't want to speak their native language. And what happens is that this phenomenon of now kids don't want to speak their first language and can't communicate with their own parents. So my new thing is to write as many bilingual books and share them with the world and instill that it is so important and critical to keep your first language. So that's something that I'll be writing about soon. And so that's what I write about. The next one's coming up in the next year.
They're so much fun to read to our kids as well. So tell me about, Wanda talked about the state data. Sean talked about some of the research behind, differences. So if you could tell me how, like the differences and the disparities that you see within your school district, and how that impacts how you bring up literacy and improve literacy for all your students.
Right. So there is so many gaps, and it's very evident when you walk into a classroom. There is no secret of what you see, and data doesn't lie. So we see the numbers and you look in the classroom and it does align. And that's actually kind of devastating when you see that the instruction doesn't align with what good practice is. And then you see the data and you know that it is why. So that's why in our district, we are very, very adamant now. This year has changed with a lot of our leadership, and we are all hands on deck. We have coordinators in the building supporting our teachers, coaches, instructional coaches. We brought in a variety of professional development, particularly for our multilingual learners and our students that are in needs, right, with IEPs. So we have PSYOP training across because we know now that 30% of our 32% of our population are multilingual learners, and over 70% are students of color. And best practice is good for everybody. PSYOP is one of those, Sheltered Instructional Operational Protocol, along with GLEAM. I don't know if you guys heard it, but it's a big deal now across the country. We have instilled GLEAM, Be Glad. So all these strategies are all over. We used to just focus on MLLs, but now we know that it's good practice for all our kids, particularly being the most diverse district in the state of Iowa. Um, and so I know you mentioned a little bit, Bambi, on what you're doing as well, but monitoring is something I haven't heard yet. And when you don't monitor, things are not going to get done. So that's why everybody, all hands on deck, everybody's observing, supporting. And as hard as it is for a teacher to be in the classroom being observed all the time, it is a need. And we have to support them in a way where they're not feeling evaluated every day, but they're feeling coached.
Thank you so much, Noemi. All right, so this question is for everyone. We'll start with Wanda. So what does it take to make this work for all Iowa students? So, what are the resources that are currently being rolled out that are really working? What are the resources that are needed, other aspects to make this work?
Okay, thank you. So the state of Iowa has rolled out letters training for educators. And the reason this is important is because you need that knowledge. You need that depth of knowledge of the science of reading. And without understanding the research behind what you're doing, you might accidentally let something go that's critical for success. And so the Letters Professional Learning is really about helping our educators making certain that they have the science of reading knowledge to use. What's really exciting is that I've heard a few people talk about leadership. And so we also have rolled out letters for administrators to really support that aspect. The letters for administrators is to help our school leaders not only understand the research behind the science of reading, but when you're in those rooms, like, what are you looking for? What's evidence of good practice? And how do I coach my teachers to be better? And so letters for administrators is a great opportunity for our school leaders to really dip into the science of reading, but then really think about how to operationalize that throughout my system. And that's really exciting. Most recently, we also have purchased licenses for a product called EPS Learning to help our students who are struggling with reading. And so there are licenses to be used with children across the state of Iowa, so that they are able to have a reading tutor, an AI reading tutor, for those times when the teacher might be with a different small group, or so that they can keep practicing their reading throughout the day. So that's exciting.
Thank you. Con, what have you seen from your neck of the woods?
I would strongly encourage folks, if they haven't already, to please check out our website, iowareadingresearchcenter.com. We are a free resource for all of Iowa. So as a part of, we are funded through an annual appropriation, also through private donation, different funders. We have different research-based curricula, applications, learning modules, et cetera, that are not only geared towards practitioners, but also administrators, caregivers. So I'd strongly encourage folks to take a look at that. I think that we contribute to what I think are sort of more high, or what I consider high level things that can help improve the literacy for Iowa students. And that's developing specialized knowledge related to reading and overall literacy, reading and writing. These specialized terms that we're tossing around, such as phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, phonics, segmenting, blending, all those are specialized terms that have these exact definitions and applications. That just doesn't fall out of the air. So specialized knowledge. But then two is supporting teachers on their important work of actually working with kids, keeping your head on a swivel in upwards of 20 or 30 plus kids in a classroom while you're trying to engage in the specialized knowledge. That takes time, that takes mentorship, apprenticeship, et cetera. So I think that those are some of the bigger things, and how they sort of fit all together in a school day can be incredibly challenging, but it is worth our time as a community of people who care about the reading development of kids to figure this out, to really think about sort of how can we all sort of pull together and develop the specialized knowledge and support for teachers in the classroom. But anyway, one last plug, iowareadingresearchcenter.com, free resource for all of Iowa.
I like to chime in.
Go for it.
So because this is such a passion of mine, thanks for reminding me. I I heard, there's a lot of research out there, particularly how to get kids to read and understand reading, right? And love reading. I think that's key. When they love reading, they will get better at reading. And so there's research by Krashen, which I love, Stephen Krashen, a lot of research by him. And the number one thing that we need to be able to do is get kids to read independently and things that they love. From my career, the only way that I've ever seen great readers is because they always have a book in their hand with something that they're passionate about. My own son, he's 24 years old, and he reads about golf. My husband reads about mechanics. My daughter reads her novel stories. And so the only way to get better at reading is to do it better. We need to allow students and teachers the opportunity to provide that for their students so they could take home a book that they're passionate about. I know the school time is just full of all the work that they have to do. However, there is opportunity for that. And I don't see it often. I don't see a lot of kids with hands in books in hands, and we should. And the next thing I want to jump on was the specialized knowledge. So teaching pre-K and kindergarten for over 10 years. I am not going to boast, but I had the highest rate of kindergartners reading, ready to go to first grade and above. And my colleague would say, in a kind of demeaning almost, but in insulting, what am I going to do with these kids when they come to my class? They're way too advanced. And also a compliment, correct? So knowing that I have experience on how multilingual learners, right? They didn't have English at all, right? The foundation was built in our classroom. Knowing that the work that I did and my partner did worked is really evident that we could close those gaps. There are things that we could do in practice, and it doesn't have to be in rote. It doesn't have to be kill and drill your children on phonics and phonemic awareness. There are things out there, hands-on, that students can do to achieve these criteria, right? These specialized knowledge that you're talking about, project-based learning, hands-on opportunities, a lot of ways that we could teach kids to love these skills. Because a lot of the times what starts happening is that kids start hating school. And you'll see that very often. They don't want to come back on grade 1, grade 2. And then what do you see in grade 3 is the students are declining. So there's a lot of opportunities out there. And that's what I want to really emphasize is that, yes, there is programs out there that do a lot of rote and a lot of kill and drill. And that's probably the worst way to teach.
I'm not sure how I definitely get your perspective on this. I think there is something to be said for students being motivated to engage in reading. I mean, and I so appreciate that comment. It's the best way of getting better at anything is to try to get sort of that end goal. And if we have critical readers, I'm not sure how often drill and kill happens though.
It happens not I would say if you go into any given kindergarten class, and if we're still practicing things like Orton Gillingham, right, which is a method, it shouldn't be something that you're sitting there for 20 minutes or over that with any given student. Then that I would call that kill and drill. Now it all depends, right? The administration in the building, are they going to allow it? It depends on the teacher if she's not competent enough to teach those. So it happens, hopefully not very often, but it's still evident that it does, and that's probably not best practice.
Yeah, I think I prefer drill and skill rather than drill and kill, but we might have to disagree.
Yeah. No, your term is right. Correct.
Can I jump in on this a little bit too? Because this is something that I think a clear to distinguish this is important, because that's something when we started making these shifts there was concerns about. And I think oftentimes you hear drill and kill or whatever you want to call it linked to explicit systematic instruction. And that doesn't have to necessarily be the case. You can have quality explicit instruction that's systematic, and it may look and feel different to teachers. But we heard some of those same concerns. Well, the kids aren't going to love reading anymore. They're not going to have books in their hands anymore. And we've seen the exact opposite. We've seen when we give the kids the skills to learn how to read, they then know how to read, and then they want to read books. And so how we're defining what drill and kill or drill that is or is not, it's probably, we don't have time to really flush that out right now. But I wouldn't allow that to be something that is a hindrance to proceeding with explicit instruction in the classroom. Our librarians will attest to the number of students they're seeing actually reading books now instead of just flitting through pages. We can look at our checkout numbers of books have increased. And additionally, the way our librarians talk about the passion they're seeing with kids and their knowledge, the background knowledge they're bringing in, the interest they have in topics of things they're learning about in the classroom. And so I would kind of push back on that a little bit in that way, but also maybe around the definition. And then I want to pivot real quickly to the question of what does it take to improve literacy for Iowa students? There's programs, there's evidence-based practices, all those things exist. Iowa Research Center is a phenomenal place to help point you in the right direction. There's a lot of dyslexia resources and organizations available as well. We can have all the resources in the world, and if we do not have good leadership in the buildings that are providing focus and clarity for systems to actually do this work, it won't matter. At best, we will have pockets of influence. We'll have a handful of classrooms that will raise achievement in their classrooms. It'll be luck of the draw if teachers get into those certain classrooms. And so it takes extreme focus and clarity from the leadership of these systems to ensure that this happens. There's a lot more I'd like to unpack on that, but we've been on this for a little bit, so I'm gonna turn it back over to Chris. But to me, that is the absolutely essential component of this. And the lack of focus that is occurring in our schools is a problem, epidemic proportion. That's comes straight from a book that we go back to a lot when we talk about school improvement. But schools are trying to focus on so many things at one time. It doesn't mean it's tyranny of the or that you can only do one thing. But if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. And we have to determine, are we serious about doing this work? When we hear the numbers of 36% of students are unable to read proficiently, are we actually committed to doing the work of taking that on? And that has to come from leaders who clear pathways, knock down barriers, support with disproportionate funding, time, energy, and focus. There's a lot more to that, but I want to make sure I share that because that's an important part. The tools and resources matter, but we've got to have leaders that are in on this work.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, Travis, is when, you're focusing on everything, you're focusing on nothing, but at the same time, what may be, seen in the Des Moines district is very different than others, where that shift in the way things are happening. And I don't want to single out Des Moines. It's just where my kids attend school. But there's definitely, different things that are happening, which is really why it's exciting to share best practices, but also making sure that we're as Bambi said earlier, reaching out to all of the edges of our classrooms. And so I want to give Bambi a minute to respond to this question as well. If, when you're looking at these disparities, when you're looking at some of the things that we just talked about earlier, how does that translate to your work with your Iowa kiddos and getting into the edges of your classroom?
It's a collective effort. Everybody has to be on their A game all the time to make sure that we're getting all of the essential components, as Sean had mentioned earlier, the phonemic awareness, the vocabulary. And it's not just in reading, it's through science, it's through social studies, it's through math, because if you cannot read, you cannot do those other things. So it's important that we're working on those skills to make sure that those things are happening. And as Travis had said, those literacy leaders, like, we have got to have literacy leaders that when they walk in the classroom, they know what phonemic awareness is and what it looks like, and if it's being done effectively, as the way the research shows. If they have no idea what's going on and teachers are closing their doors and becoming an island, and I'm going to do what I want to do no matter what my principal says, because it happens, this is not what's going to change the Iowa percentages of proficient readers.
Thank you, Bambi. Appreciate it. So, the next question I wanted to ask, and this kind of relates to what Noemi was talking about, as well as some of the things that others have mentioned, and the barriers that educators, administrators are facing in improving literacy. And we would love to start with Wanda at the state level of what you're seeing. And you also feel free to chime in if I'm a big believer. Okay, there's a barrier. What do you think a possible solution would be? So.
Yes, I think a barrier is that we're still trying to improve our systems. Like, we're working hard, and we're all working hard. I don't know an educator who isn't working hard right now. We're all working very hard. But I think the barrier is like the systems knowledge to really understand what it takes with our leaders to have the kind of improvement that Travis is talking about. like, what's that concerted effort look like? How do I get that to happen in my district or my building? How do I reach all my kids? What kind of knowledge does each child need? Um, and so I agree that you can have all the resources in the world, but it's the alignment, right? It's the alignment between the resources, the knowledge, the leadership, and it's all of those pieces coming together to push the movement forward. And so that would be my response to that.
Thank you, Wanda. Sean, you have all the free resources. What are your thoughts on the barriers and how those free resources are taken care of? So,
Yeah, well, we are
you said
thrilled to
magic word free.
Yeah, no, yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, iowareadingresearchcenter.com. So what I love about our role in the state is that we're able to partner with different districts and schools. Right now, we have 15 different district partners across the state. And then so we provide free professional development, technical assistance, and they also share their data with us. So we're able to have meaningful discussions on what are different areas of improvement that they're striving for, what are areas for success that we need to celebrate. And during our time there, but then also looking at national surveys, I think Iowa is not unlike a lot of our other Midwestern neighbors, in that they are really trying to come to grips with how do we scale up areas of improvement or pockets of success to where it is a statewide initiative. If we're being honest with ourselves, there is a ton of research in the science of reading. Most of it is the largest of it. It would be multiple schools, multiple districts. Right now, we're still trying to figure out how to replicate that on a public health level in terms of a whole state. So there has definitely been, many people probably heard about these different instances. It's called the Mississippi Miracle, to where the state of Mississippi has poured in time, resources, and personnel related to the science of reading, and they saw improvement. I think that that's an exciting development, but I think sort of where we can add value here as a reading research center to help educators and administrators is really start to dig down deep and to figure out, well, what are the exact levers that need to be in place at schools, districts, area education agencies to help that out.
And sorry, how long did that take them to achieve? Just thinking about the Mississippi Miracle.
I
Multiple
believe,
years.
yeah, at least
How many?
years. At
5
least
years? Okay,
five,
thank you.
at least, I believe it was
Okay.
multiple.
Okay. Appreciate that. Thank you so much. All right, Travis, what are you seeing, with barriers, whether it's your staff, your teachers, your parents, your students?
I think when it comes to barriers, may not be a popular answer amongst educators and principals and all of us on this screen, but I think we're the biggest barrier. I honestly think we have schools full of people trying so hard. They're working. I've never been or met teachers that are not working hard. Everybody is working so hard, but it's not focused. We are trying to accomplish so many things at one time that it's not focused. And so we may make incremental improvements on 15 different things, but it's very incremental. And so I would bring it back to the biggest barriers, I honestly think, are leadership. When we've had so many districts contact us about the results we're getting. They want to know, how are you doing it? What did you do? Typically, it starts with what program are you using? And we start with, it's not about a program. We didn't even really identify like a tier 1 program until we're 3 years into this work. And what we share is, first, it's about leadership paradigms. The leaders in your district have to take responsibility for the results the system is getting. Secondly, then there has to be new learning that accompanies that. And that is for your leaders and then also for your teachers. You have to have that understanding of the why and the how. And then you have to have an improvement model to actually move it forward. When I think about barriers, most schools, like us in the past, all schools have a school improvement model. They all have school improvement plans. We would sometimes have 6 school improvement goals. And underneath that, every building would have 5 or more goals aligned to every one of those goals. And then every department would have 3 goals. And before you know it, you have 50 goals in one district. And the reality is, year after year after year, at best, it was like incremental and probably accidental improvement. What I believe the biggest barrier is the inability of leaders and districts, and this, I think the state owns some responsibility for this too, in driving to focus. If we're saying literacy is the key issue, this is a public health issue, this is an issue for all of us to take on, then we've got to simplify and focus everyone on a concerted effort in the same direction. And it's not tyranny of the or. It doesn't mean you cannot do anything else. But it has to be very clear that we're moving forward with disproportionate time, disproportionate energy, disproportionate funding to address this issue. And that means you got to say no to a lot of really good things. But that's what it took for us, is to say no to a lot of really good things. And we essentially have had one district, one goal for the last 4 years, and it's around literacy. We've seen unbelievable results. But what also has happened at the same time, our science scores have gone up, our math scores have gone up. The data we have on social emotional health continues to be steady, if not improving, in nearly all areas. And so what are we good at schools? We're good at teaching kids. That's what we need to focus on. And if we're saying literacy is the crucial area, that's the crux for the state to get at, then we need to focus our systems on how do we teach kids literacy. And that may mean saying no to lots of really good things that we're being asked to do by the state, that we are ourselves wanting to do, because we see so many challenges and needs in front of us at the school buildings. We can all look around and see 50 different directions we need to run to try to take on things. But I think until we as a state focus, I don't think we'll see our statewide numbers improve. I think you'll see pockets of excellence, buildings here, districts here, if possible, certainly classrooms here and there. But we've got to say, this is priority one.
Travis has his eyes on the prize. Thank you so much, Bambi.
The only thing I would add to that is that we are producing insufficient teacher training still. We have teachers who graduate with a special ed endorsement, reading endorsement, and do not know how to teach children how to read. We have got to fix that system, as well as everything else that Travis just mentioned.
Thank you. Very succinct. Appreciate that. Noemi, what are you seeing as barriers?
Yeah, ditto. I agree with, there's just so many things. I feel like our arrows are pointing in all directions, and sometimes we're just not focused on one thing to really execute that thing that we know we need to, but we are. As a teacher, it's overwhelming, especially, if you're an elementary educator, you got to teach all the content areas. And so you have to stop and go, right? And you have to figure out, how am I, as an educator, going to incorporate literacy in everything, right? Because we tell teachers, in math, guess what? That's literacy. You could teach literacy in math. Who knew? Language, because a lot of the times we have our multilingual learners going into math and they fail because the teachers feel like they don't have the strategies, right? They feel like they can't teach the students, but we pull language out of every content area, and we could improve that. Some of the things that I feel like are barriers is that our population in Iowa is definitely changing. Our demographics is changing. And so most of our teachers, if you think about it, in Iowa and Des Moines Public Schools alone, we have over 5,600 staff, and only 1.6% are Latino teachers. Out of that 5,085 are Latino teachers. We have less than 3% that are Black, and then our population of students of color is over 65%. So thinking about, okay, our students do lack the representation, our schools lack the representation. That is a barrier as well. Our superintendent talked about that research has said that children will perform better when they have teachers that look like them. And again, thinking about the foundations, the need, the support, the relationships they build with those staff. A lot of the staff that they build relationship for are restorative team that works in the hallways. And we need more teachers that represent our population. So I know that Bambi shared a little about differentiation. It's hard when you have to differentiate with multiple students that learn different ways. It's difficult, it's challenging. So going back to what Travis said, yes, being very purposeful on what your focus is and align, right? Align what you really need to do, because it's challenging for our teachers. It's really hard. And yes, they do work hard every single day. They come in. My daughter's a teacher. She became a teacher, a reading teacher, and she's amazing. She does a lot of work teaching reading, and she does a lot of things with hands-on podcast. She brings on things that the kids are interested in, and they love her. They love her class. They see me in the streets and they're like, oh my gosh, you're Mrs. McKinley's mom. She's awesome. but you could do things that are very engaging to support. But yeah, those are some of the barriers that I'll share, because language is definitely one of them. And we could jump on top of that with a variety of support for our staff and strategies that we could help them with all day long.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So I'm actually going to switch the order and have Noemi go first on this question. So I like to have people leave in action, and how can they not after listening to all of your passion amongst all of you today? So how can Iowans learn more or get involved in the solution? And there's also a question from our participants about, how can parents, I'm trying to find it now. How can parents improve literacy and reading skills at the early childhood, pre-K to 6? So have you start, and we have about 6 minutes left. So
Okay.
minute and a half for each of you.
I'll be very brief. Definitely get our parents involved. This is my new position this year, is to work predominantly with our families. And every month we're having a meeting that we're talking specifically on the needs that they're lacking. And a lot of parents are coming to these meetings and saying, I had no idea. I had no idea what this means. I had no idea how the grading system works, how the anything in school works. And now they're awoke and they're loving this, and we're bringing them in. Particularly right now, we're working with the Latino population because that's the highest need, but getting them involved for sure.
Thank you. Bambi.
I have a lot because I am an advocate. I am on 3 different dyslexia boards. Educate yourself and others, and then advocate for policy change, advocate for students in your district, because if you, even your own child, when you advocate for your own child, you're advocating for all children. Raise awareness through volunteering, donating, join or create your own, to educate others. There's a lot.
That's fantastic. And Bambi actually has a whole list for us. And so I encourage everyone to go back to the Whova app. We'll figure out how to get it posted there, because we want to share all the links. And she did a great job of compiling a lot of ways for y'all to get involved. All right, Travis.
My predicament mine is going to be, I would suggest you demand focus. Meet with your school board, meet with your superintendent, ask what the focus is. If they hand you a glossy, wonderful looking document that has 6 to 8 categories of things they're working on, ask them to consider thinking about doing it a different way. When I shared that we've had so many districts reach out to us, they want to know what we're doing. And the school improvement model we use is called the 4 disciplines of execution. You can find plenty of, it's not really unique to education. You can find it out there and all for business. When we walk through our process, how we got from point A to point B, what we did, virtually no district that we've worked with has ended by saying, yeah, we'll do that with literacy. Even though that's what the conversation starts on, every time it ends up going a different direction of some other bright, shiny object they want to impact. Until we decide we're going to focus on this, it won't change. So that'd be my message. Demand focus, ask them to consider clarity and really focusing in on making this priority number 1.
Don't laminate those priorities till it's done, huh? I heard the glossy part. All right, Sean.
Yeah, I would strongly encourage, if anybody's interested, we have a caregiver hub on our website that unpacks the different areas of science or reading. So I'm hopeful that can be a useful resource to parents across Iowa. 2 is that it's an emerging part of the science of reading and the importance of oral language. So even if you have a student at home who might not like to read, just that oral conversation regarding what new vocabulary words, what are some things they're learning about in school, even reading aloud to your student interesting passages to your kiddos. I have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old at home. I think there's something to be said for never really outgrowing that read aloud stage. I think that talking about what you're reading can only help. And then a third thing would be is that with the rollout of the personalized reading plan legislation, part of that is going to be if your student scores below proficient, if your kiddo does, you are going to receive a letter home if you're in the grades, if your kid's in the grades K through 6. So there is going to need to be just this uncomfortable, I think, phase to where parents, if you get something home and you're not quite sure what this means in terms of what the reading data shows, I think being out there and asking questions on like, okay, what does it mean that my son or daughter scored below proficient? I think unpacking that is going to be critical to that partnership that parents can play with schools.
Thank you. Wanda.
And I was going down that same route with my answer. I think the partnership that you form with your child's teacher in school is critical to helping your child. I think the partnerships can include outside organizations as well, helping yourself learn. I had to do that when my child was young. He's a grown adult now, but I had to become the learner and figure this out. And so help yourself learn so you can, or let yourself learn so you can help your child. And don't think that you know everything that there is to know up front. We can all learn more. And then, but going back to that partnership, I think it's really important that we do ask gentle questions of our schools. I'm not asking us to be combative with our schools, but instead like link arms and how can I help my child? What resources do you have for me to use? And if you don't have the resources, how can we work together to get them? How can I help you get the knowledge? How can I gain the knowledge I need? And so linking arms and really becoming partners in this effort to improve literacy.
That is wonderful. We are right at time. How perfect are all of you? Learned so much from you. Hope everyone in our audience learned a lot as well. And really appreciate your passion and dedication to improving the literacy of Iowa's youth. And definitely you made me want to go and hug all the teachers right now. Appreciate all of you and the administrators. So thank you all and hope you all have a wonderful day. For the audience, please go ahead and check out the next session. And thank you so much.